Hello and welcome to Nice and Blunt. It's time to get ready for this weekend's game action. We got to make those start-sit decisions, and there's 6 players I'm going to talk about in this video who I think need to be in your lineup. These are my Week 13 must-starts. All right, let's get into it. Okay. So I'm going to give you 3 running backs and 3 wide receivers for this video, and I don't like to make this segment too easy on myself, so I don't like to give you anyone in my top 12. However, this week there's several players injured like Dalvin Cook and DeAndre Swift, and Nick Chubb, Aaron Jones, and Christian McCaffrey are not available either. And because Alvin Kamara didn't suit up, a lot of players moved up one spot as well, so that's why I'm going to cheat just a little bit and give you my running back 11 this week, Javonte Williams. Now, originally I had him as running back 16 in my rankings earlier this week. However, things have changed, and Melvin Gordon is looking doubtful to suit up on Sunday night. And that's a big upgrade for Javonte Williams. This is going to be a coming out party for him. He's a second-round pick, and he's the future in this backfield. Melvin Gordon is an unrestricted free agent, and this game is going to be the test to see if Javonte Williams can handle this workload. Last week, Javonte Williams went off. He got 3 passes for 57 yards, and he also scored on the ground. And in prime time on Sunday, he's going to be showcased and will be a key contributor in the passing game. Gordon is averaging 12 rush attempts per game this season, plus getting 2 targets per game and scoring 11.5 half PPR points per game. So that's all available in this backfield, and it's pretty much all going to go to Javonte Williams. This season, on a per-game basis in 11 games, these are his stats. He averages 13.1 touches per game. That's running back 33 on a per-game basis. 2.5 receptions per game, also ranks 33rd among running backs. 69.2 total yards per game, though, ranks 27th among running backs. And he's really getting it done on the ground. He averages 4.9 yards per carry. That ranks 8th among all running backs in the NFL at the moment, and it's a really elite stat. He hasn't been scoring very much. That's where Melvin Gordon has really overshadowed him. But he scored 3 touchdowns this season, and that rate of 0.27 touchdowns per game ranks 49th in the NFL among running backs. So it can definitely go up, and odds are he will get all of those goal line touches this week. He's averaging only 9.6 half PPR points per game so far this season, so that's why he hasn't really been a consistent play, only ranks 34th on a per game basis. Assuming that Melvin Gordon doesn't suit up, then Javonte Williams is going to get 20 or so touches and at least 5 targets, I think, and probably catch all of them. So in PPR formats, he has a really high floor, and if he scores a touchdown, he's probably going to go over 20 half PPR points. Now look, the only red flag is this matchup. He does face the Chiefs, who are only allowing 112 rushing yards per game this season. That ranks 15th, so pretty middle of the pack. But to running backs in the last 6 games, let's get a little more specific, they've only given up 77 rushing yards per game to opposing backfields on 4.1 yards per carry. So Javonte Williams may struggle in the efficiency department this week. And in the last 5 games, they've given up 0 rushing touchdowns. They gave up 5 in the first month of the season. However, going back to the last 7 games, opponents have not scored a rushing touchdown on them. However, Javonte is a clear dual threat, and he has an 82% catch percentage this season. So he's going to get plenty of targets in this one, and he's seen at least 3 targets in 8 of his last 9 games. The Chiefs are great against the run, but they actually give up a lot of catches to opposing running backs. On average, in the last 6 games, the Chiefs' defense to opposing backfields is giving up an average of 7.8 targets per game, 6.7 receptions per game, for 53 receiving yards a game. Austin Ekeler is the only player to score a receiving touchdown on the Chiefs as a running back this season, so odds are that doesn't happen. But even if he doesn't, his floor in any type of PPR format is going to be double-digit points for sure. I know they're going to give him the ball a lot, and I just feel confident that he gets into the end zone this week and pays off with a ceiling type of game. But he's just so safe with that floor in any type of PPR format. That's why I have him at number 11. But one spot behind him, I got Jamaal Williams, my running back 12 this week. DeAndre Swift has been ruled out, so Williams gets the start, and 20 touches is also in the cards on Sunday. The Lions play the Vikings. In that matchup, week 5, the Lions combined for 32 touches in the backfield and a total of 169 scrimmage yards on that game. So Williams could easily go over 100 yards from scrimmage and also catch 5 passes or more. His floor is very secure, especially in any type of PPR format. And if he scores a touchdown, then he also has top 10 upside. But in 9 games this season, Jamaal Williams has a pretty decent fantasy floor. He's already getting an average of 12.7 touches per game, putting up 56.1 total yards per game, and 8.1 half PPR points per game on average. So we know that number is going up this week, and he has a very safe double-digit floor. We saw his production shoot up on Thanksgiving when DeAndre Swift got injured in the first quarter. He saw 15 carries and caught all 5 of his targets for 83 total yards against the Bears. He did not score a touchdown. But against the Vikings, it's a much easier matchup. They rank 30th in the NFL, third worst against the run, giving up 134 rushing yards per game. And to running backs specifically, an average of 102 rushing yards per game on 4.5 yards per carry, and they've allowed 8 rushing touchdowns through 11 games. The odds are decent that Jamaal Williams scores, but even if he doesn't, his floor is definitely at least 10 or 12 points. However, with injuries in their backfields, these players are a little bit more obvious. Let's take a bit of a swing on a player with a lot more risk who I view as a top 20 option this week. My third must-start running back is Miles Sanders, who is my running back 16 in my rankings. If you've watched my must-start videos before, then you know that for running backs, I like to target a few different matchups. The Chargers, but they go up against Joe Mixon this week. He's obviously a top 3 running back. I have him at number 2. And then Jonathan Taylor, the clear number 1 option, is going up against the Texans. So some great matchups for elite running backs. I got both of them on one team. I'm really excited about it. But a team that I really love to target is the Jets' run defense. The Jets have been terrible against the run. They've allowed 129 rushing yards per game. That ranks 27th, so 6th worst in the NFL. And to running backs specifically, 112 rushing yards per game on average, on 4.6 yards per carry. And in 11 games, they've given up 17 rushing touchdowns. They were much better last week, only giving up 3 yards per carry to Houston, but that's Houston. It doesn't really count. This week, they face the Philadelphia Eagles, whose offense ranks first in rushing in the NFL, averaging 158 rushing yards per game. Now, most of that comes from Jalen Hurts, who averages 10 carries a game on 5.7 yards per carry. So he is the main ball carrier. He's also scored 8 rushing touchdowns. However, he is nursing an ankle injury at the moment, and he's been limited in practice this week, splitting the first team reps 50-50 with Gardner Minshew, and he is a true game time decision. So even if he plays, I expect those rush attempts to come down, and he is going to be limited in the run game with that ankle injury. So that means they're going to rely on the backfield a little bit more, and Jordan Howard has already been ruled out for this game. In the 4 games that he's played for the Eagles this season, he has seen at least double-digit carries in each of them. So if you take like 3 or 4 carries from Jalen Hurts plus at least 10 from Jordan Howard, that's starting to look like a big workload that becomes available in this backfield. Boston Scott is dealing with an illness, and he's questionable at the moment. He'll probably play because it's not COVID. But even if that happens, he hasn't practiced this week. So Kenny Gainwell is probably going to be involved, but he's much more of a passing back. So the first team reps have all been going to Miles Sanders. And when you put all of these factors together, this is starting to look like a perfect storm for Miles Sanders to go off. These are his per game stats in 9 games this season. He's averaging 12 touches a game. That only ranks 39th for a running back's workload. 2.2 receptions per game also ranks 39th. And 64 total yards per game ranks 32nd. But when it comes to running the ball, he averages 5.2 yards per carry, and that ranks 5th in the NFL among all running backs this season. The thing that's really holding him back is that he hasn't found the end zone once this season. 0 rushing touchdowns per game obviously ranks last, but it ranks 73rd among all running backs in the league. 7.5 half PPR points per game is his average, and that only comes in as running back 49 on a per game basis. It's kind of baffling why Sanders only gets 10 rush attempts per game, given that he has the 5th best yards per carry among all running backs this season. But when you consider he's only played in 9 games, he got injured in 2 of them mid-game. He has struggled to stay healthy in his career, so that's the main reason why we haven't seen a massive workload for Miles Sanders. This is my main concern, that he doesn't finish the game. He's obviously been a huge letdown this season. If you drafted him in that 3rd or 4th round, then he really hasn't paid off. And the main reason why he has no upside is because he hasn't scored a touchdown, which is really strange and very concerning, because as a team, the Eagles have 18 total rushing touchdowns this season, one of the highest numbers in the NFL. There is a chance that Hurts scores all the touchdowns himself again. He had 3 rushing touchdowns 2 weeks ago, but I'm willing to bet that with that ankle injury, he probably isn't the focal point on the goal line, and Miles Sanders probably gets a handful of carries in goal-to-go situations. So that's why I'm willing to bet on him this week. I believe that he hits pay dirt, but I also think that he goes over 100 rushing yards on the Jets, because not only is he rushing for 5.2 yards per carry this season, but in his last 4 games specifically, he's actually running for 6.1 yards per carry. That would rank 1st in the NFL. So the only one who can stop him is himself if he can't finish the game. But as long as that happens, he's a lock for 10 fantasy points. And he does offer top 10 upside if he can score at least 1 touchdown. This matchup is where he should be able to do it. But if it doesn't happen this week, then it's not going to happen at all the rest of the season. But that's it for running backs. If you want to check out my rankings, I'll have that available up here and at the end of the video. But let's move on to wide receiver. And my number 1 must start this week is Hunter Renfrow, my wide receiver 14 in week 13. This is the highest I've ranked Renfrow all season, and he will be the clear-cut number 1 option in Vegas because Darren Waller is doubtful. He hasn't practiced all week, and it's not looking good, so Renfrow needs to step up just like he did last week. In week 12 against the Cowboys on Thanksgiving, he saw 9 targets. He caught 8 of them for 134 yards. He also had 1 rush attempt for 2 yards, but he did not get into the end zone. Still, he put up 17.6 half PPR points, went over 20 in full PPR. Before that game, Renfrow was averaging less than 10 yards per reception, but catching 78% of his passes. He's one of the most reliable wide receivers in the NFL, and he's going to see another 10 targets or so in this game. He is a lock in your lineup. In 4 of his last 5 games, he's caught at least 7 receptions, and that feels like a guarantee to happen once again. Ideally, you have him in full PPR because he's a bit less touchdown dependent in that format, but I think he probably gets into the end zone this week anyways because he's going up against Washington, and their defense has given up 267 passing yards per game this season. That ranks 30th in the NFL, so 3rd worst. And to wide receivers specifically, the football team has given up 179 passing yards per game, 12.9 yards per reception, and 14 receiving touchdowns in 11 games. So they're giving up a lot of short intermediate catches, and that's where Hunter Renfrow thrives. So I think he'll probably score. The odds are looking pretty good. I'm so confident in him, I ranked him above Stephon Diggs, my wide receiver 15. But right behind Diggs is Brandon Aiyuk, my wide receiver 16, and this is where I had him ranked coming into the season. I had Aiyuk as a must draft. Obviously, that didn't pay off for me. Deebo Samuel was the player you wanted, and he's been a top 5 wide receiver this season, but he's not going to play in this game. So we're going to see the real potential of Aiyuk showcased in this matchup, and he's been producing well in recent weeks. These are his per-game stats in the last 5 games. He's been averaging 6.4 targets per game. That ranks 44th among wide receivers, but he's catching 4.6 of them, and that ranks 34th in the league among wide receivers on a per game basis. 67.6 yards per game ranks as wide receiver 19 on average, and he's caught 2 touchdowns in those 5 games. So an average of 0.4 touchdowns per game ranks 25th among wide receivers. Altogether, 11.5 half PPR points per game is 27th best on a per game basis this season. So he's been a very consistent flex option the last 5 games, and this week you can count on him as a lock-it-in wide receiver too. In 3 of those games, he went over 80 yards receiving, and I think he'll go over 100 in this game. We know the targets are going to be there, so you can count on him. And this matchup against Seattle also offers a ton of upside. The Seahawks defense is allowing 274 passing yards per game this season. That ranks 31st in the NFL. And to wide receivers, only 162 receiving yards per game on 11.8 yards per reception, but 7 receiving touchdowns in 11 games. So decent odds to score. However, these two teams played in week 4, and they actually gave up 14 receptions for 220 yards and 2 touchdowns, most of which went to Deebo Samuel. So I think the 49ers know their weaknesses. This is a division game. They're going to be able to exploit those weaknesses. Aiyuk has a ton of upside this week, and you should have a lot more confidence in him. For a high floor, he has a lot less risk than usual this week. But again, this is a player who moves up the depth chart with one of his teammates injured. So maybe I need to give you a more risky option, and that's why I'm going to pivot to my wide receiver 23 this week, Van Jefferson. Originally, I had Odell Beckham Jr. ranked here at number 23, but he's dealing with a hip injury, and he was limited at practice today, but didn't practice the first 2 games. He's still pretty new to the offense, and that's why I think they're going to lean a bit more heavily on Van Jefferson. You know Cooper Kupp's going to go off. He's my number 1 wide receiver this week. But the Rams are on a terrible skid. They've lost 3 straight games and haven't won in over a month. So you know this team is going to be sharp as fuck coming into this matchup, and the Rams are just going to tee off. In my gut, I just know that they're going to put up 40 plus points on the scoreboard, and you want a piece of this offense. Cooper Kupp and Darrell Henderson are the obvious picks, but Van Jefferson needs to be in your lineup if you are looking for a high upside play. He goes up against the Jaguars defense, who's given up 244 passing yards per game. That ranks 18th in the NFL. To wide receivers specifically, 167 receiving yards per game on 12.1 yards per reception, so not too many deep plays, but 8 receiving touchdowns in 11 games, and a lot of those have come on some deep passes. So these stats are a bit average, I'm not going to lie, but it's definitely not a bad matchup. And when you consider the context that I mentioned, that they haven't won in a month, they need to let off some steam, and they're not going to take their foot off the gas. Stafford is going to take several deep shots, and Van Jefferson is clearly the deep threat. He's found a groove lately, and on a per game basis in his last 5 games, he's averaging 7.2 targets per game. That ranks as wide receiver 34, but he's only catching 3.2 receptions per game. That ranks as wide receiver 61 on a per game basis. However, he's putting up 63.8 yards per game on average, and that ranks as wide receiver 27. So a lot of volatility, but all of this is because he averages 19.9 yards per reception during that span. That ranks as wide receiver 2 in that category, and on the season, he averages 17.6 yards per reception, which ranks 5th among all wide receivers. And in this 5-game stretch, let's stay in this sample size, 2 touchdowns, so an average 0.4 touchdowns per game is the same as Aiyuk, ranks 25th among wide receivers, and altogether 10.4 half PPR points per game, ranks as wide receiver 33. Now look, I'm not going to pretend like Van doesn't come with some risk, especially if you're in a full PPR format. Only 3 receptions is not very safe. There's a lot of risk there, but all you need is one play for him to go off, and I really think that that's going to be there this week. He's going to take it to the house against the Jaguars. In half PPR, he has one of the highest ceilings of any flex option. Van Jefferson is my wide receiver 23, and he comes in 1 spot ahead of DK Metcalf. I would bench DK for Van Jefferson if I had the option. So that's going to wrap up this video. Those are my must starts for this week. At the running back position, I got Javonte Williams, Jamaal Williams, and Miles Sanders all inside my top 16. And at wide receiver, I got Hunter Renfrow at 14, Brandon Aiyuk at 16, and Van Jefferson at 23. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more content. I'll be out with another video tomorrow with injury updates, and I'll also fill you in on how my fantasy rosters are doing this season. I got 2 teams, 2 different leagues, and we're coming up on the playoffs. So if you want to catch that, be sure to subscribe to the channel. My name is Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching Nice and Blunt.